Hey there, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to guide you through tonight's tale. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Also, drop a comment, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? Now, settle in and let yourself relax. It was a Wednesday evening when I finally got home, worn out and a bit cranky after a rough day at work. The moment I stepped onto my porch, I noticed a small cardboard box sitting on the doormat. There were no labels, no sender information, nothing to identify where it had come from. At first glance, it seemed harmless. But something about it immediately felt off. The tape was messy, and the top flaps looked like they'd been torn or handled roughly. I paused for a moment, then bent down to pick it up. It was heavier than it looked. A strange tension settled in my arms as I glanced around the quiet street. There wasn't a soul in sight, just a few parked cars and some weak porch lights flickering on nearby homes. Once inside, I locked the door and brought the box to the kitchen table. I dropped my keys on the counter and flipped on the overhead light. The box sat there, oddly out of place, as if it didn't belong in my home. Usually, my place is still and quiet, no pets, no roommates, just the steady hum of the fridge. But that night, something felt different. Like something was waiting. My pulse thudded in my ears. I told myself to stop overthinking and just open the thing. I grabbed scissors and carefully sliced through the tape. Inside was a wad of crumpled newspaper. Beneath that, wrapped in bubble wrap, was an object about the size of my fist, maybe a little larger. As I unwrapped it, I found myself staring at something I couldn't easily define. It was made from a dark, glossy material, maybe some kind of stone. It had jagged edges, ridges, and a strange hole on one side. It didn't resemble a tool or sculpture. I had no idea what it was supposed to be. A wave of unease twisted in my stomach, like I was realizing something important but couldn't grasp what. My hands trembled slightly as I searched the box for a note. There was nothing. Maybe it was a weird gag gift sent to the wrong address. I placed the object gently on the table and brushed my fingers across its surface. It felt cold and rough. When I tapped it against the table, it made a dull thud, like a stone. I stood there, staring at it, equal parts disturbed and intrigued. I decided to leave it where it was for the night. Maybe there was a shipping label hidden somewhere I'd missed. But the box was bare, no barcode, no postage, nothing at all. When I looked at the time, it was nearly 8 p.m. I reheated some leftover pasta and tried to act like everything was normal. I put on the TV in the living room, but my eyes kept flicking back to that strange thing on the table. It didn't move, but the air felt heavier, like the atmosphere had changed. My skin tingled like I'd just come back from a long run. My legs wouldn't stay still, so I paced until my food was ready. Even while eating, I kept watching the object, lit faintly from across the room. It just sat there, silent and ominous. Later that night, I headed to bed. I didn't want it anywhere near my room, so I left it in the kitchen and shut the door behind me. But I couldn't shake the discomfort. My sheets felt too warm, the air too chilly. I tossed and turned, my thoughts always circling back to that object. I checked my phone, no calls, no messages. No explanation. I eventually drifted off close to midnight, but my sleep was broken. Around 2 a.m., a faint scraping sound pulled me from sleep. Like furniture being dragged across the floor. My heart leapt. Throat dry, I got up and crept into the hallway, the floor creaking with every step. The house was silent, dimly lit by the street light filtering in. I waited, tense. Then, a soft knock, like something tapping the wall. I flipped on the hallway light. Nothing. I stepped into the kitchen, turning on lights one by one. The object was still there. It hadn't moved. It looked just the same, like a heavy chunk of stone. I stood frozen, ears straining. Only the fridge humming. The microwave ticking. No other sounds. I grabbed a glass of water and returned to bed. The rest of the night passed without incident. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well and asked to work from home. Truthfully, I just couldn't shake the unease. I tried to focus on emails and video calls, but my eyes kept drifting to the shelf in the living room. The object was still there, dark, still, unnerving. Around noon, my internet started cutting in and out. Each time the signal dropped, I heard a faint tapping noise directly above my desk. The ceiling. The attic. Every tap made my skin crawl. After the third interruption, I couldn't take it anymore. I retrieved the step ladder from the garage and set it beneath the attic hatch. When I pulled the hatch open, the fold-down wooden steps groaned under their own weight. The smell of insulation, dust, and stale air drifted down. I coughed, turned on my flashlight, and aimed it upward. The attic was just as I remembered, low beams, boxes scattered here and there, old holiday decorations and battered furniture. I climbed slowly, testing each rung. My flashlight scanned the space. No footprints. No shifted dust. No sign anyone had been up there. I walked the length of the beam, checking every shadowed corner. Nothing. My shoulders finally loosened a little. At least, for now, it looked empty. That night, I tried to relax in front of the TV, but I couldn't concentrate. Around 9 p.m., the overhead light in the living room flickered twice, then died completely. I muttered a curse and checked the breaker box. The kitchen lights were still working, so it wasn't the circuit. I flipped the switch back and forth, but the living room stayed dark. I gave up and turned on a lamp instead. Still, the unease was back. My heart was racing. My hands trembled slightly. I kept glancing at the object. Finally, I picked it up, shoved it into a drawer in the TV stand, and closed it. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I went to bed around 11 p.m., scrolling through emails on my phone. Then I heard a loud thump overhead, directly above the bed. The attic. My chest tightened. I turned off my phone and listened. 5 seconds later, another thump. It sounded like something heavy dropping to the floor. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, and headed to the hallway. I pulled the attic hatch down again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I climbed quickly, heart pounding in my ears. The attic was pitch black, save for the narrow beam from my flashlight. Everything looked unchanged, until I spotted something near the corner. A small piece of pink insulation was scattered on the floor, like it had been ripped out of the wall. I moved in closer and saw a hand-sized hole behind the insulation. The wood inside looked scratched, gouged, like something had clawed or scraped it. My breath grew shallow. The air smelled damp and musty. I tried to peer into the hole, but it was too dark. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I backed away and descended the ladder, slamming the hatch shut. I locked my bedroom door, not that it would help, and lay awake for hours, ears tuned to every creak. But nothing more happened that night. The next morning, I called a contractor friend and asked if he could inspect the attic. He said he was booked until next week. I didn't want to call the cops with no evidence, no signs of a break-in. Just noises. And that thing. My nerves were shot. I couldn't eat. My thoughts felt foggy. I drank way too much coffee and flinched at every sound. That afternoon, I snapped. I took the object outside and dropped it near the fence in the backyard. Then I went inside and locked the back door. For the first time in days, I felt lighter. But peace didn't last. About an hour later, I heard a scraping noise at the back door. I froze. There's a small window in the door, so I looked through it. Nothing. I stepped outside. The object was gone. Only a patch of flattened grass remained where I'd placed it. My stomach twisted. I searched the yard, checked under the porch, behind the bins. Nothing. My hands were shaking by the time I locked the door and went back inside. That night, I sat on the couch watching the local news with the volume low. I kept expecting footsteps, more tapping, but nothing came. I started to wonder if it had all been a prank. Maybe someone had followed me home, dropped the package, and snuck into the yard to retrieve it. It was far-fetched, but the idea calmed me. Around 1 a.m., I finally decided to go to bed. I double-checked the doors, then walked upstairs. I stopped cold in the doorway to my room. My closet door was open. I always keep it shut. Heart thudding, I stepped closer. The closet light was off. I didn't see anyone. I flicked the switch. My clothes looked untouched, except something was lying on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was the object. The same cold, heavy thing I'd left in the backyard. I dropped it and stumbled backward. My breath caught in my throat. My hands were slick with sweat. How was it here? I grabbed it, rushed downstairs, and slammed it onto the kitchen table. My heart was racing so hard it hurt. I couldn't make sense of anything. I didn't even want to touch it earlier, so how could I have brought it in without realizing? I wrapped it in bubble wrap, hands trembling, and shoved it back into the TV stand drawer. Right then, I heard it, a slow creaking from above. The attic. I froze, staring at the ceiling. The creaking went on for nearly a minute, then stopped. I sat in silence, barely breathing. For the next 2 days, I avoided the drawer. I slept on the couch, too afraid to go upstairs. The attic stayed mostly quiet, with only the occasional creak. On Saturday, my contractor friend finally came. He examined the attic, looked at the hole, and said he didn't see anything unusual. No pests, no intruder, no signs of entry. He patched the hole and replaced the insulation. Told me everything looked fine. After he left, I stared at the drawer for a long time. I couldn't keep it here. I grabbed a duffel bag, wrapped the object in an old towel, and stuffed it inside. It felt unnaturally cold. I zipped it shut and headed for the car. As I stepped outside, I heard a faint knocking sound, coming from the attic. I didn't look back. I drove to a storage facility downtown, rented a small unit, and locked the bag inside. The whole drive there, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing followed me. At least, nothing I could see. Back at home, the air felt lighter. I didn't hear anything that night. I finally slept in my own bed. Days passed. No packages. No tapping. No thumps. The silence felt almost unreal. Still, Every now and then, I catch myself staring at the TV stand, remembering the night I found that thing in my closet. I don't know where it came from, or why it was sent to me. But I hope it stays locked away. I haven't gone back to the storage unit. I don't plan to. As long as that thing stays out of my house, I'll pretend none of it happened. The attic is quiet now. But if it ever starts again, I don't know what I'll do. It was quiet, too quiet, when he finally stepped out of the car. I watched him through the rearview mirror as he lingered by the door, not moving, just standing there like he was waiting for something. The ride had officially ended, the app confirmed that much, but I didn't drive off. I should have. I was free to go, but something about the way he paused kept me in place. My fingers gripped the gear shift, ready to put the car in motion the second he stepped away. But he didn't. He remained right there beside the car, his back slightly hunched, his face turned just enough that I thought he might be glancing at me, though it was hard to tell. The street lamp nearby flickered weakly, casting long shadows but offering little clarity. After a few seconds, I looked down at my phone to check for new ride requests. When I glanced up again, he was gone. I blinked hard. My eyes swept the side mirrors, then the rear view, scanning the empty sidewalk. There was no way he could have gotten far. We were on a long stretch of road with no alleys, no open gates, no doors ajar. It was like he'd melted into the darkness. My heartbeat thudded so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. I rolled down the window, half expecting to catch the sound of retreating footsteps. Nothing. Not even a shuffle. I stepped out. The air was still, heavy. Both ends of the street were deserted. The only sound was the low hum of a distant air conditioning unit, maybe a generator. I walked a few feet toward the parked cars, peering between them. Just empty pavement and scattered trash. No sign of him. I looked up at the apartment buildings. All the windows were dark. Not a curtain swayed. Not a light flickered. No way he got inside that fast, unless he already belonged there. But even that didn't sit right with me. I got back in the car and locked the doors immediately. My hands trembled as they gripped the steering wheel. I didn't drive off at first. I just kept looking. Watching. Half expecting him to jump out from behind a corner. I reached for my water bottle and took a sip, but my throat was so tight I could barely swallow. After a couple of minutes, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I pulled away from the curb slowly, headlights cutting through the stillness ahead. At the next intersection, I turned right, hoping to catch a glimpse of him on the cross street. But there was nothing, just empty sidewalk and silence. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe he had a key to a building entrance I hadn't noticed. Maybe he ducked behind a car faster than I thought. But none of it felt right. I drove to a gas station a few blocks away. The place was brightly lit and empty, the kind of place that made you feel safe by default. I didn't get out. I just parked near the pump and sat there, trying to calm down. I opened my ride history and checked the details of that trip. Everything looked normal. The name, the route, the fare, it all seemed routine. But it didn't feel routine. Not at all. After a while, I took another sip of water, wiped my face, and decided to take one more ride. Something to push the weirdness out of my head. I accepted a nearby request and started driving again. That next ride was uneventful. My passenger was a talkative guy who smelled like stale cigarettes. He vented about work while I nodded along, but my mind wasn't with him. It kept circling back to the man from before. The way he sat so still. The way he said, "Stop here," and then vanished. When I dropped that passenger off, I called it a night. I was done. Back at my building, the underground garage felt dimmer than usual. I parked in my usual spot, but the unease hadn't left. I glanced behind me before stepping out, my nerves still on edge. In the elevator, I stared at my own reflection in the metal doors, sweat on my brow, eyes wide and restless. I double-checked my apartment door the moment I locked it behind me. My living room was darker than I expected. The lamp on the timer hadn't come on. Probably just burned out. Still, I turned on the overhead light and stood there, unsure of what to do with myself. I charged my phone and went to the window. The street below was calm. A few parked cars. A cat nosing through a trash bag. Nothing strange. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I started to drift off, I saw his face again, or what I remembered of it. I heard his voice. "Stop here." I remembered the way he stood by the car door, then disappeared without a sound. By morning, I was exhausted. I opened the app and looked at the ride again. Still nothing odd on the surface. I thought about filing a report, but what would I even say? That someone disappeared into thin air. No one would believe it. That day, I stayed in. Tried to relax. Watched some TV, made a few sandwiches. But every creak in the hallway sent a jolt through me. I kept listening for footsteps that weren't there. That night, I told myself I had to get back out there. Face it head on. I drove around for a while, picked up a few normal passengers, tried to focus. But just as I was about to sign off for the night, a request came through. The pickup location. Same street. Same corner. My gut twisted. I almost didn't accept. But something told me I had to. I drove there slowly. The cafe was still closed. That flickering street lamp still buzzed overhead. I pulled up and looked around. No one was there. I rolled down my window. "Anyone here for a ride?" Silence. I cancelled the ride and drove off, glancing at the mirrors every few seconds. My car was empty, but it didn't feel that way. I still drive. I've told this story to a couple of friends. They usually give me a weird look, like they think I'm joking or maybe just overtired. But I know what I saw. Or didn't see. I don't know who he was, or how he disappeared. But I remember how my skin crawled. How the air felt thick when he got out of the car. And every time I see a pickup request with a one-letter name, or a pin near that street, I hesitate. Because something about that night has never let me go. The air felt thick and stale as soon as I stepped onto the gravel. The wooden ties beneath my boots were warped, cracked with age, and slick with moss. I'd been hired to assess a long-abandoned stretch of railroad, just a routine check for potential restoration. Locals said there wasn't much out here. Just rusted steel and rotting timber. But the moment I stepped onto that track, something felt off. I couldn't say what it was exactly, maybe the unnatural silence, or the fact that there weren't any footprints in the gravel. Maybe it was the subtle, creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. But deep down, I knew better. My name's Tom. I've been a railroad inspector for 7 years. I've dealt with collapsed tunnels, flooded lines, entire roots swallowed by trees and vines. I've handled it all. I don't scare easy, not when I know what to expect. But nothing prepared me for what happened that day. The assignment started around 6 a.m. I drove my pickup out to the old yard on the county's west end. The sun was barely up, and the place looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. I parked near a rusted signal tower and hiked about a mile in. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and rotted wood. I brought my standard gear, wrench, track gauge, chalk, flashlight, some water and a protein bar. I moved through the inspection the way I always do, methodical, focused. Checking ties, testing rail alignment, marking defects. Each step echoed with the crunch of gravel. But something about the quiet started to get under my skin. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. Half an hour in, I felt that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was staring. I spun around. Nothing. Just empty rails and some weeds growing through the cracks. A rusted warning sign in the distance. But no one there. I shook it off. 10 minutes later, I heard it, gravel shifting behind me. I turned. There, about 100 yards back, stood a man. Tall. Slender. Wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hair was messy, and he had a rough beard. He didn't move. He just stared, at least, I think he did. From that distance, I couldn't see his eyes. My pulse picked up. I raised a hand and called out, "You need something." No reply. He just stood there. I waited. Then went back to work, trying to focus. But I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. He was still there. Not moving. Watching. Or waiting. After a while, I turned fully to confront him, and that's when I realized he'd moved. He was closer now. Maybe 80 yards. Still silent. Still staring. Hands by his sides, face unreadable. I felt something cold crawl down my spine. I considered walking toward him, maybe just to clear the air. But something about him, the stillness, the way he just watched, it made my skin crawl. I kept moving, heading farther down the line. Kept pretending this was just another inspection. But every time I stopped, he was closer. At one point, he was maybe 30 yards back. I shouted again, more firmly this time. "Hey, buddy. You lost." He didn't answer. No change in expression. No shift in posture. Just one slow step forward. That was it. It sent adrenaline surging through my chest. My instincts screamed. I looked around for an exit, a side path, anything. About 50 yards ahead, I spotted a narrow dirt trail cutting off from the tracks. I headed for it fast, hand clutching my notepad, backpack thumping against my back. I didn't dare run, not yet. But I walked fast. Behind me, I heard no footsteps. But when I glanced back, he was there. Closer again. Always closer. Never running. Just silently gliding forward. At one point, he was no more than 10 yards away, and I still hadn't heard him move. My chest tightened. I felt lightheaded. My breath came short. I forced myself into a jog. Up ahead were a few old maintenance sheds, metal, rusted, but maybe a place to hide or get my bearings. I rounded the curve and made for them, praying they weren't locked. No luck. Chains on every door. Frustrated, I turned back to face him. He was gone. No sound. No trace. The trail behind me was empty. I stepped forward. Looked around. Scanned the trees, the brush, even behind the sheds. Nothing. It was like he'd never been there. But I knew he had. I'd seen his face. Still rattled, I forced myself to finish the inspection. Scribbled a few last notes. Rails cracked near mile 14. Ties rotted. Possible sabotage. I didn't actually believe someone had sabotaged the track. But I was too shaken to trust my own judgment. I took a different trail back, eyes darting through the trees, ears straining for sound. Every branch, every gust of wind made me jump. Finally, I saw the signal tower in the distance. My truck. My escape. I got in, locked the doors, and gripped the steering wheel. Just sat there, trying to calm my breath. Then I started the engine and pulled away, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Nothing followed. But the feeling didn't leave me, not that night, not even after I got home. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Blank face. Silent stare. Getting closer. I never told my supervisor. Just handed over my notes and left out the part about the man. I didn't want to sound crazy. A week later, my supervisor told me I had to go back, near mile marker 14. Management needed more details. I agreed. But this time, I brought Carl, another inspector. I told him I wanted a second pair of eyes. I never told him what I'd seen. It was a clear morning, the kind that tricks you into thinking everything's fine. The sky was sharp blue, the sun warming our backs as we walked. Definitely better than my last trip here, at least on the surface. When we reached the same stretch of forgotten tracks, I tried to sound relaxed. Let's split up, I said, keeping my tone casual. We'll cover more ground. Carl nodded, heading toward the section near the crossing. I went back to where I'd first seen him. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. My breathing grew shallow, and I kept checking my radio like it was some kind of lifeline. Still on. Still working. The rails hadn't changed. Same rust, same tangled weeds curling through the ties. The air was dead still. I kept scanning, looking for any glimpse of a dark figure. Nothing. Birds chirped now and then, which was somehow comforting. I kept telling myself, normal day, nothing strange. An hour passed. That's when I heard it, footsteps behind me. I spun around fast, heart thudding in my chest. It was just Carl. He'd finished his section and came to check on me. I tried not to look rattled. We walked together for a while, small talk about the tracks. Then Carl said he was going to check a junction box farther down. I watched him go. Suddenly, it felt like I was the only person left in the world. I continued my inspection, kneeling to check the gauge in places, but that creeping sensation came back, the tingling at the back of my neck, the dead silence except for the pounding in my ears. I turned. He was there. Same man. Same dark coat. Same blank expression. He stood near a cracked rail switch, just watching. Like before. My stomach dropped. I swallowed, trying to keep calm, hoping Carl was still nearby. But I didn't see him. The man took a step toward me. Silent. Measured. Intentional. I grabbed my radio. Carl, you there? My voice trembled. Static. No answer. Another step. Closer now. I pressed the button harder. Carl, come in, do you hear me? More static. My palms were slick with sweat. He moved again, this time faster, now maybe 30 yards out. Hey! Stop right there! I yelled. He didn't. I thought about running, but something told me not to, like it would only make things worse. And I didn't want to lead him to Carl either. So I stood my ground, heart hammering, my hand gripping the flashlight. Even in daylight, I needed something to hold. I flicked it on and pointed the beam at him. No reaction. He was about 10 yards out now. I could see the dirt on his jacket, like he'd been sleeping outside. His face looked unwashed, scruffy beard, scar on his cheek. His eyes were empty. I tried to speak. All I managed was a shaky, "Who are you?" No answer. I backed away, boots crunching on gravel. He kept coming. Then, he stopped. Stared. That's when my radio crackled. "Tom. You call me. I'm at the junction box. You good?" Carl's voice was like a jolt of electricity. I tried to reply, but my throat was locked up. The man was 5 yards away. I could see the twitch of his fingers, the way his hand started to rise like he was about to reach for me. "Tom, answer me." Carl's voice came through again. That did it. The man paused, hand dropping, almost startled. Then, as if on cue, he turned. No rush. No panic. Just walked around the curve in the tracks and disappeared behind a pile of rotted ties. Gone. I stood there, frozen, lungs heaving. It took Carl a few minutes to reach me, and by then I was alone. I must have looked like a wreck, flashlight still on, drenched in sweat. "What happened?" he asked. "There was someone here," I said, my voice dry. "He was standing right here, watching me. Then he vanished." Carl scanned the area. "You think it was just a guy from around here? A worker?" I shook my head. "No. I've seen him before. Last week. Same place. Doesn't talk. Just follows." Carl looked unsettled. "That's messed up, man." We finished up fast after that, staying side by side. Every noise had me flinching. But the man didn't return. Back at the truck, I was still shaken. Carl asked a bunch of questions, but I didn't have answers. I only knew what I saw, and the way it made me feel. That kind of dread doesn't leave easily. I've heard rumors since. Some say drifters hang around the old rails. But no one's described someone like him. Silent. Closer every time. Then gone without a trace. I told myself it was over. I wouldn't see him again. But I still look over my shoulder. Even now, when I'm on a different assignment miles away, I catch myself glancing behind me, expecting to see that blank stare. I asked management not to send me back to that sector. I didn't explain why. They didn't press, they got the data, moved on. But I didn't. I still feel it. The quiet. The way the man seemed to soak up sound. The way he moved without making a noise. I've tried telling friends. One laughed. Thought I was making up ghost stories. I wish I was. It wasn't a story. It was real. Or it felt real. And if I ever see him again, I don't think I'll wait around. This time, I'll run. I moved into this old house about 2 months after the incident. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place on the outskirts of a small town, quiet neighborhood, long driveway, trees that sway when the wind gets serious. I told myself the change of scenery would help. A fresh start, somewhere far from abandoned rail lines and broken switches. For a while, it worked. I got back into my routine, inspections, paperwork, long drives. I even started sleeping better. But sometimes at night, when the house is still and the wind pushes the branches just right, I hear things. Footsteps. The faint crunch of gravel. Or the soft hum of silence that feels too complete, like it's hiding something. It's probably nothing. My mind playing tricks on me. That's what I tell myself, anyway. Last week, though, something happened I can't explain. I came home late, close to midnight. I'd been up north doing an inspection near a small town that barely had a name. I parked the truck, grabbed my gear, and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. Lights off, doors locked. I kicked off my boots, set my bag down, and poured a drink to help me wind down. Then I heard it, 3 slow taps on the back window. Not knocks. Taps. Deliberate. Even. Like someone was trying to get my attention without alarming me. I froze. My glass hovered halfway to my lips. I live alone. No neighbors nearby. No trees close enough to touch the house. I walked to the window, keeping the lights off so I wouldn't backlight myself. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds. No one there. I waited. Listened. Nothing. I locked the window, though it was already locked, and pulled the curtain tight. Then I did a sweep of the house. Checked every door, every lock. I even stepped outside with a flashlight, scanning the yard, the woods at the edge of the property. Nothing moved. No sound. No animals. No wind. Just that silence again. I told myself it could have been the old frame settling, or maybe the wind hitting something the right way. That made enough sense to sleep, but the unease didn't leave. The next day, I checked the window in daylight. There were 3 faint smudges. Not fingerprints exactly, but marks. Like someone had tapped with the side of their hand or maybe a knuckle. I tried to wipe them off, but they didn't go easily. I haven't told anyone about that, not even Carl. Because here's the thing. I recognized the pattern. The spacing. The rhythm. It was the same sound I'd heard behind me on the tracks that day, those soft, steady steps. It's been months. I've moved. I've changed my routes. But something tells me he knows where I am. And I don't think he's finished with me yet. About 2 months ago, I bought a house that seemed like a decent deal. From the outside, it looked fine, just needed some cosmetic updates. I figured with a few weekends of painting and swapping out some fixtures, I could turn it into a comfortable place. For the first few weeks, it felt like any other older home. The plumbing made some noise, the windows creaked when the wind picked up, but nothing alarming. Just character. But a few nights ago, something shifted. It was late Friday, and I was watching TV in the living room when I heard this dull, rhythmic thumping. Faint, but enough to make me hit pause. At first, I thought I imagined it. Houses settle, pipes knock, all that. But this had a weird consistency, like something, or someone, was pressing against a wall repeatedly. Then came a soft scraping noise. It sounded like metal dragging lightly across concrete. and it was coming from the basement. I had only been down there once, just after closing. It was dusty, smelled like old stone, and the lighting was dim. The previous owner had said he left some junk down there, but I hadn't paid it much attention. I was focused on getting the upstairs livable. Still, that noise unsettled me. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and made my way to the basement door, which sits between the living room and kitchen. The moment I reached for the doorknob, I felt tense, like something cold pressing against the back of my neck. I flipped the switch at the top of the stairs. Only one of the bulbs lit up, casting long shadows across the peeling floor. With every step downward, the stairs creaked under my weight, the air grew colder, and the faint scent of mildew filled my nose. I swept my flashlight across the room. Old furniture covered in dusty sheets. Cardboard boxes, some collapsed, some torn. Webs in the corners. But the noise had stopped. Then, in the far corner, I spotted it, a large, wooden trunk. Metal hinges, rusted. A padlock that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The wood was chipped, stained with something I couldn't identify. It gave me a bad feeling immediately. I almost turned back. But curiosity pushed me forward. As I approached, I noticed a strange odor, sour, metallic, and damp. I nudged the lid open. The lock was so loose it barely held. Inside were strange items, an old cloth pouch, a stiff pair of gloves, dried herbs tied with twine, a broken mirror with jagged edges. At the bottom was a thick book, its leather cover engraved with some unfamiliar symbol. The pages were yellowed and musty. The whole thing felt ritualistic. Dark. I shut the lid quickly and backed away, heart pounding. I locked the basement door and told myself it was just leftovers from some eccentric previous owner. I didn't need to worry about it. But the house felt different after that. Heavier somehow. By Sunday, I was brushing my teeth when I heard a knock, just one, coming from the hallway. I froze. Then came another, 3 seconds later. I checked. Nothing there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining footsteps outside my bedroom. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard a floorboard creak. But I was too drained to investigate. Monday morning, I rushed through my routine, still shaken. As I grabbed a soda from the fridge that evening, I heard a metallic clink. I turned around. The basement doorknob was jiggling. I stared at it, frozen. Then it stopped. I checked the latch. It was tight. Opened the door, stillness. I bolted it shut and later installed a slide lock from the hardware store. That night, I felt a bit more secure, until I was woken around 2 a.m. by a loud metal clang. I jumped up, heart racing. The bolt I had locked. It was now open. I crept down, flashlight in hand. The bulb overhead flickered and popped. Total darkness. I descended anyway. Another clang echoed from the far wall. I scanned the room. The trunk was still there, closed. Then I saw something new, a bent metal rod on the ground, like a tool that hadn't been there before. I stepped toward it and picked it up. Behind me, I heard a soft rustling. I whipped around. Nothing. The trunk looked untouched, but when I opened it again, the book inside was open. Pages flipped. Margins scribbled with strange handwriting. I hadn't left it that way. I slammed it shut and bolted back upstairs. By the next evening, I'd had enough. I wanted it gone. Gloves, bags, bin, I was ready. But when I opened the basement door, the bolt was unlocked again. I forced myself down. The light was still out. I dragged the trunk to the stairs, but it was too heavy. I emptied it into the bin, everything except the book. It was gone. I dumped the bin's contents into the trash outside, hoping that would end it. That night, I was on the couch when I heard a loud thud from the kitchen. I rushed over. The chair I'd wedged against the basement door was shoved aside. The bolt unlocked. The door slightly open. I called the police. 2 officers showed up. They searched the house and the yard. No forced entry. No sign of anyone. They told me everything seemed fine. But I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And I know the book is still out there. The whole trip just because things were weird. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked around the side of the building, my footsteps crunching on loose gravel. The group was gone, completely vanished. I stared out across the open vineyard, rows of gnarled vines twisting under a low grey sky, but there was no one. Not a whisper of movement. I rubbed my arms against the sudden chill. Back inside, the tasting room was still empty. I called out, "Hello," but got no answer. The back room door was still ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. I should have left then. My body knew something wasn't right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was meant to see. So I stepped behind the counter and peeked into the back room. It was dim, lit only by a single bulb swinging gently from the ceiling. Inside were rows of dusty wine bottles lining the walls, many without labels, some with symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal. In the far corner, a wooden table held an open book, its pages yellowed and covered in strange handwriting, tight loops, thick slashes, and margins filled with symbols I didn't recognize. I moved closer. Something about the handwriting felt familiar. My hands trembled as I flipped the pages. I couldn't read the text, it wasn't in English, but there were drawings too. Diagrams. Circles within circles. One of them looked exactly like the etching from the missing book I'd found in my basement. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, heart racing, and nearly knocked over a bottle. The glass clinked, and suddenly I heard footsteps above me, on the second floor. Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. They weren't trying to hide. I backed out of the room and turned toward the exit, but the woman was standing in the doorway now. Her face was blank. Her eyes glassy. "You shouldn't be back there," she said softly. I muttered something like, "Sorry, I was just looking for you," and tried to move past her, but she didn't budge. She stared at me for a long moment, then finally stepped aside. "Tour's about to begin," she said. I bolted past her and out the front door without another word. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, the gravel spitting under my tires as I reversed and peeled out of the lot. Only when I was several miles down the road and my phone finally found a signal again did I slow down. My hands were shaking. My mind was a mess. I had no idea what I'd seen, but it was connected to the house, somehow. That book. That symbol. The people moving like they weren't fully there. The woman with the lifeless smile. Since that visit, strange things have only gotten worse. Sometimes, I wake up with the taste of that bitter wine in my mouth. Sometimes, I hear footsteps upstairs when I know no one's there. And sometimes, when I dream, I see rows and rows of vines under grey skies. And behind them, watching me, is a group of silent people. Still. Blank. Waiting. The sky had turned a deep grey, and the first stars were just starting to show. The only light came from that weak, flickering fire. I couldn't understand why no one seemed to react to me, not in a rude way, but as if I didn't exist at all. I thought about heading back to the building, but something about the strange circle made me hesitate. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I turned and started back toward the winery. As I walked, I felt a presence behind me. I glanced back and saw the group still dancing, but now they were closer together, their movements more frantic. The chanting started again, faster this time, and the words sounded harsher. I picked up my pace, not running but walking quickly, stepping over uneven dirt clumps and small rocks. My breathing grew heavier, and tension built in my shoulders. I just wanted to get to my car and leave. When I reached the building, I went to the front door. The tasting room lights were still on, but the door was locked. I jiggled the handle and knocked on the glass, but no one answered. Inside, the woman who had greeted me stood by the counter, but she had her back to the door. I knocked louder and yelled, "Hey, can you open up? I want to go." She didn't move. It was like she couldn't hear me. Panic hit my chest sharply, and I noticed my hands trembling. I told myself to calm down, but it didn't help. My throat tightened. I circled around to the side of the building, hoping to find another entrance or at least a window. It was pitch dark on that side. Then I heard rustling behind the building, footsteps crunching in the gravel. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, breath echoing in my head. I peeked around the corner and saw two silhouettes moving toward the back, walking in that same slow, synchronized way as the group before. I took a few steps backward carefully, not making a sound, and watched until they disappeared behind a row of vines. Then I kept moving, searching for a back door. I found a simple wooden door with a rusty handle. It was unlocked. I slipped inside and found myself in a dark hallway. I ran my hand along the wall until I found a light switch. It flickered on. The hallway smelled like damp earth, and the walls were thick stone. Several crates were stacked on one side, and old wine bottles sat on a rickety shelf. I moved slowly, stepping around the crates. At the end of the hall, stairs led down. I had no interest in exploring a cellar. I looked for another door instead and found one on the left. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and realized I was behind the tasting bar in the staff area. The woman was still there at the front, standing by the counter, her back to me. Her posture was stiff, and she was holding that same glass of wine. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said clearly. She didn't move. I reached out and touched her shoulder. Still nothing. I moved to face her. Her eyes stared past me at some point above my head. She didn't blink. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I waved my hand in front of her face. No reaction. She looked like a living statue. My throat went dry. I turned away, not seeing anyone else around. I rushed out through the front door. This time it opened when I turned the handle from inside. The sun had fully set. Outside was nearly pitch black except for a few lanterns on the porch. I heard the chanting again, louder, echoing from beyond the vineyard. I sprinted to my car, gravel crunching beneath my feet. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. Finally, I unlocked the door, jumped in, started the engine, and turned on the headlights. The beams lit up the driveway and part of the dirt path. The chanting grew louder. I saw a cluster of people standing about 30 yards ahead, blocking the exit. They formed a line across the road. Their faces were unclear, but I knew they were staring at me. My chest tightened, sweat trickled down my face, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly. I told myself I had no choice but to drive forward. I eased into gear and pressed the accelerator. They didn't move. The chanting continued in that strange language. My headlights revealed their blank expressions, mouths moving rapidly with the words. I honked the horn, and the sound echoed across the property. They didn't flinch. My heart pounded as I worried they might try to surround the car if I got out. I inched forward. At the last second, they parted, splitting into two groups on either side of the driveway. I drove through the gap, feeling the uneven ground under my tires. No one touched the car or spoke, only the chanting filled the air. As I passed, I glanced out the window. Some were dirty, with smudges on their cheeks and foreheads. Others were cleaner, but all had vacant stares. Their eyes never met mine. The chanting pounded in my ears. Once clear, I hit the gas and sped down the driveway. Every rock beneath the wheels jolted the car. My headlights flickered over dusty vineyards and twisted trees. After about a minute, the winery and the people vanished from sight. The chanting faded. My chest loosened a bit, but my grip on the wheel stayed tight. I reached the main road. Still no phone signal. I decided to drive until I found a town or lights. About 10 minutes later, I saw a small gas station sign glowing faintly. I pulled in, parked near a pump, and sat, catching my breath. My shirt was damp with sweat, and my stomach knotted up. The station was closed but brightly lit. I felt safer just being somewhere with lights. I tried my phone again. A single bar appeared. I called a friend, said I needed to explain something weird, but all I could do was ask for directions to the nearest motel. I didn't mention the ceremony or the strange people. I didn't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy. I drove another half hour to a small roadside motel. I paid for a room, took a shower, and sat on the bed staring at the ceiling. My body shook from adrenaline. I couldn't shake the chanting from my mind. A dull ache throbbed in my temples. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. It felt like I couldn't fully process what happened. They acted like I didn't exist, right until I tried to leave. Then they blocked the path but let me pass when I pushed forward. It was like I was invisible, except at the final moment, when I needed the exit. I spent the night with the TV on, flipping channels without watching, just wanting background noise, anything but chanting and dancing feet on dry soil. Around 4 a.m., I dozed off for a couple of hours. When I woke, I felt dull and groggy. I left the motel and drove back to the nearest city. I never filed a police report or told anyone else. It sounded too strange to explain, and there was no sign of harm. Nobody died, and I didn't see any children involved. I figured the authorities wouldn't do much without concrete details. Part of me wondered if the people in that circle would come after me. But I doubted it. They seemed trapped in their own world, and I was barely a nuisance. I never went back to that winery. I tried researching it online but found almost nothing, just a couple old photos, a vague address, and outdated reviews. No working phone number, and the website link was broken. I stopped trying. Sometimes I think about that dusty tasting room, the woman who wouldn't meet my eyes, the silent group drifting around the building, and that chanting circle at night. I can still smell burning herbs and taste the sour, unlabeled wine. Whenever I think of it, my palms sweat and my heart races. I don't have a fancy explanation for what I saw. But I know what happened and how it made me feel. That line of people blocking the exit, chanting in unison, then parting without a word, it's the strangest thing I've ever experienced. It still gives me chills, even though I came out physically fine. I can't shake the feeling that I brushed against something I wasn't supposed to witness. I haven't been to a winery since. And if I ever see a flyer for a remote wine tasting, I remember those blank faces in that eerie circle, and I drive right past. Echoed across the empty land, sharp and sudden against the quiet hum of nature. For a moment, nothing answered except the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Then, from behind the ridge where I had seen the figures before, a low, almost hesitant voice replied, "Who's there?" My heart skipped. The voice was rough, cautious, maybe even a little scared. I stayed where I was, trying to keep my tone calm and steady. Just someone passing through. I didn't mean to intrude. There was a pause. Then a figure stepped into view, emerging from the shadow of the ridge, a middle-aged man, his face weathered and eyes wary. Behind him, a second figure, smaller, possibly a woman, peeked out but stayed behind. "Why are you here?" the man asked, his voice still guarded. "I was curious about the old farmhouse," I said. "Looks like it hasn't been lived in for years. I'm just exploring." He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving mine. "This place, it's been empty a long time. Folks around here don't come near much." "Do you live nearby?" I asked. "A bit farther down the road," he said. "We keep to ourselves." I hesitated, then asked, "Did you used to live here?" The man glanced back toward the farmhouse, his expression tightening. "Used to," he said quietly. "But it's not safe anymore." "Why's that?" He shook his head, and the woman stepped forward, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. "Best if you don't stick around," she said softly. Something in their tone warned me they weren't just protecting property, they were protecting secrets. I felt the chill again, the sense that this place held stories long buried, better left untouched. "I understand," I said, lowering my voice. "I'll be going." As I turned away, their eyes followed me, watching until I was out of sight. The farmhouse stood behind me, silent, broken, but somehow alive with the weight of unseen memories. I went to get something to eat. The cabin had a tiny kitchen area with a mini fridge and an old microwave. The fridge buzzed steadily, strangely comforting, like a reminder of normal life. I heated a cup of instant noodles and sat at the small kitchen table. There was only one chair, which made the space feel lonely as I ate. Outside, the wind picked up. I could hear branches tapping on the roof. At first, it was a gentle patter, but then it grew louder, almost like someone drumming their fingertips on the ceiling. I looked up, but all I saw was a plain ceiling with a single exposed bulb. After dinner, I cleaned up and returned to the living room. The only entertainment was a small, old TV from the early 90s. I tried turning it on, but nothing happened, no signal, no static, just a blank screen. So, I either had to read the book I'd brought or flip through the diary I'd found. I chose the diary. The entries became frantic. The writer talked about hearing whispers outside and seeing a figure near the tree line, dressed in dark clothes, moving slowly through the woods. One entry said, "I know I'm not alone here. I see it every night. Sometimes it stands near the window and looks at me. My skin crawled. My heart pounded harder. I kept glancing nervously toward the front windows. By the time I finished half the diary, it was late. I was tired and didn't want to scare myself more. I changed into comfortable clothes, got under the covers, and tried to sleep. The bed squeaked with every movement, which annoyed me. But I couldn't sleep. I heard the branches scraping the cabin outside. The wind howled a bit. My mind raced with thoughts of the diary entries. I kept reminding myself it was just a story in a notebook left behind by someone nervous. Still, something felt off. The darkness in the bedroom felt thick. Every time I moved, the bed springs squealed. Eventually, I drifted off. Hours later, I woke up, eyes wide open, heart pounding. I listened. It was quiet for a moment, then I heard a faint creak on the wooden porch, like someone stepping on an old board. I froze. My pulse thudded in my temples. The wind had died down, so it couldn't have been that. I waited, barely breathing, listening for more footsteps. Nothing. I sat up slowly, turned on the lamp, and looked around. The window showed only blackness outside. No sign of movement. My heart raced so fast it made my chest feel tight. I decided not to check the porch. I told myself it was just the cabin settling, but part of me knew it sounded like footsteps. I tried to sleep again. After a while, my mind calmed. Morning came. Sunlight poured through the window, and everything seemed normal again. I felt silly for getting scared. I made coffee and stepped onto the porch to sip it. The trees looked like any other morning in the forest, damp from last night's rain. The air was cool and fresh. I breathed it in and decided to explore nearby trails. I grabbed a bottle of water and my phone, locked the cabin, and headed down the path. The forest was dense but the trail was clear and well maintained. I saw squirrels darting around as the sun climbed higher. The smell of wet leaves and pine filled the air. It felt good to move and clear my head. I returned tired in the late afternoon, hungry. Inside, the stale smell hung in the air again, like it never fully cleared out. I opened some windows to air the place out. That's when I noticed the desk drawer pulled open. The diary lay on top, opened to a page in the middle. I was sure I'd left it closed and neatly stacked. But now it was wide open, and the page had fresh wrinkles, like someone had pressed down hard on it. My stomach churned. I read the page. It described strange marks on the windows, smudges or handprints, and hearing a voice calling the writer's name. A chill crawled up my spine. I glanced at the windows in the living room. Dusty, but no fresh marks. I checked each one carefully. Nothing. I couldn't explain why the diary was open. I stood there, mind racing. Maybe I forgot to close it. I told myself I was just on edge. That evening, I tried to stay calm. I read a bit, ate a sandwich, and listened as the wind picked up again. By nightfall, it grew colder. I tried the cabin's heater, but it rattled so much I turned it off. The forecast said it wouldn't be too cold to sleep without it, so I put on an extra layer. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered once, then stabilized. I kept a flashlight nearby just in case the power cut out. I sat in the living room reading more diary entries. The writer talked about tapping on the walls late at night, like knuckles rapping on wood. They mentioned faint knocking on the front door. My heart jumped, it reminded me of the noise on the porch last night. I forced myself to keep reading. One entry said the writer had confronted whatever was outside. They flung open the door but saw nothing. Then they heard footsteps circling the cabin, moving quickly. They locked themselves inside. I gripped the diary tightly, knuckles white, sweat on my forehead. I decided to stop reading for the night. Trying to distract myself, I rummaged through the kitchen cabinet. I found old matches, a candle, and a half-used box of crackers. No entertainment, but at least something. I shut off the living room light and walked to the bedroom. Passing the window near the front door, I thought I saw movement outside. I stopped. The porch light was on, casting a dim glow over the steps. For a second, I swore I saw a shadow slip past the porch's edge. My pulse sped up. My hands felt clammy. I took a deep breath and leaned closer to the window. Nothing. The trees were still. The yard was dark. No sign of anyone. I hurried to the bedroom, shut the door behind me, and clicked on the lamp. I kept my eyes off the window, but my mind was racing. Panic started creeping in. I got under the covers but couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. Then I heard a creak outside, just like last night. My heart hammered. I stared at the bedroom door, waiting. Another creak, closer this time. I told myself to ignore it, but my body tensed, breathing quickened. I reached for my phone. Barely one bar. I wanted to call someone, but what would I say? There's noises in the woods. It didn't feel like an emergency. I stayed awake, eyes on the door. The noise stopped. After a few minutes, I turned off the light, sank into the pillow, and waited for sleep. Eventually, I drifted off. Morning came again, sunlight spilling through the curtains. I felt relief. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside to check the porch. The old boards creaked beneath me. Nothing unusual, just damp leaves and pine needles. No footprints, no marks, no sign of anyone else. I decided to spend the day out of the cabin. I drove into the nearest town to buy supplies and clear my head. The road was empty, winding through dense forest. The sky was bright and clear. I bought enough food to last the rest of my stay, planning to tough it out. Returning late afternoon, I parked and walked up the porch. The door was slightly ajar. I always locked it. My stomach flipped. I pushed it open. At first, the living room looked normal, but the desk drawer was pulled out again. The diary lay on the floor, open with pages bent against the floorboards. My hands shook as I picked it up. There was new writing scrawled in the margin of one page, "Stop reading." It hadn't been there before. The handwriting matched the rest of the diary. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I knew I hadn't written it. No one else should have been there. I set the diary on the desk and scanned the room. Everything else seemed untouched. My bag was still in the corner. The kitchen looked the same, except the single chair had shifted slightly. I started breathing heavily, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe the caretaker had come by and left a warning, but why write it in the diary? Why say stop reading? I considered leaving right then, but part of me wanted to stick it out, maybe confront whatever was happening. I put away my groceries, double-checked the windows, and locked the door again. I even wedged a small chair under the doorknob to block it in case someone tried to push it open. Evening came. I kept glancing nervously at the diary. That note kept echoing in my head. I watched the sunset from the porch, hoping fresh air would calm me. The forest darkened slowly, the orange light fading between the trees. Eventually, I went inside, sat at the desk, turned on the lamp, and opened the diary again. I skimmed the next pages. The writer described hearing heavy breathing outside the bedroom window at night. They felt watched constantly. One of the last entries said, "I can't leave. It won't let me. It's here. Night after night. It knows I'm afraid." My whole body tensed. The hair on my arms stood on end. That was the last written entry. After that, one blank page. Then a final page with those same 3 words. Stop reading. I shut the diary, feeling a wave of dread. Then I heard it. A knock on the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. My heart slammed against my chest. I jumped up so fast I almost knocked over the chair. The room was silent again. I stared at the door, hands shaking. Another knock. My throat went dry. I couldn't speak. I just stared, half expecting the door to burst open. But it stayed closed. I moved closer, one slow step at a time. My feet felt like bricks. The knocks came again, slow and steady. I flicked on the porch light from the switch by the door. Through the small window, I saw nothing. Just the empty porch. No figure. No shadow. I told myself to stay calm, but I was breathing hard. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice was shaky. Silence. I waited a moment, then carefully moved the chair blocking the door. I had no weapon, but I had to see. I opened the door. The porch was empty. The forest beyond was dark. The wind rustled branches faintly. I stepped outside, heart pounding in my ears. I looked around. No one. No movement, just trees swaying. I went back inside, shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My body was tense. My mind raced. I thought about the diary's warnings and about leaving immediately. But I was too shaken to drive those winding roads at night. I felt like running would mean giving in to whatever was messing with me. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening for more sounds. The only noise was my breathing and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Eventually, I went to bed, leaving the hallway light on and locking the bedroom door. I stayed awake, staring at the door. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. My thoughts scattered. I pictured the previous occupant, writing those entries, hearing the same noises, seeing the same signs. I wondered if they ever left. There was no mention of their escape, just that last warning, "Stop reading." At dawn, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, sunlight spilled through the curtains. I was stiff from sitting against the headboard all night. In the living room, the diary lay closed on the desk with no new messages. The front door was still locked. No sign of forced entry. I packed quickly, body shaking, nerves frayed. I left the diary where I found it, in the drawer on the desk. I didn't want to take it or destroy it. I just wanted to get away. Before leaving, I stood on the porch, taking in the morning stillness. The forest looked calm as if none of it had happened. But I still felt watched. I walked to my car, threw my bag in. The neighborhood streetlights gave me just enough light as I kept jogging toward my block. My house sits in the middle of the street, a small, one-story place with a simple porch and a single-car driveway. I sprinted the last stretch, relief washing over me as I saw the glow of my porch light. I ran up the steps, unlocked the door, and got inside as fast as I could. My lungs burned, my chest felt heavy, and my hands shook. I locked the door immediately, sliding the deadbolt and the chain into place, then stood in the entryway, panting, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the house was quiet. The clock in the living room ticked steadily. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm down, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. My mouth was dry, my legs weak. The image of those masks kept replaying in my head, the empty eyes behind them, their motionless stance. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I stepped into the living room and peeked through the front window, parting the curtains just enough. My porch light illuminated the yard, the sidewalk, and part of the street. At first, I saw nothing, then I noticed a figure standing across the street near a large tree on my neighbor's lawn. Another mask. It looked exactly like the ones in the woods. My gut twisted. I tried to swallow, but my throat tightened. The figure stood motionless for a few seconds before retreating into the darkness. I let the curtain fall. My hands trembled. I didn't know whether to call the police. What would I say? I saw masked people in the woods, and now one's on my street. It felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew what I saw was real. My heart wouldn't slow. I checked the back door next. I made sure it was locked, then looked out the small kitchen window. Nothing but the fence and my neighbor's yard behind me. I turned off most of the lights, leaving just a lamp on in the living room. I didn't want to stand out as an easy target through the windows. Standing in the dark hallway, every tiny noise made me jump, the fridge humming, the ice machine clicking, the pipes creaking. My mind was racing. Eventually, I forced myself to sit on the couch. I tried to think if I'd offended anyone or done something to deserve this, but nothing came to mind. My life was ordinary: work, home, running, TV, repeat. No enemies, no big secrets. So who were these people? I got up and peeked out the window again. The street was empty. The neighbors had their porch light on, but no movement anywhere. I caught my reflection in the glass: sweaty hair, pale face, wide eyes. Anxiety hit me again, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I thought about calling a friend but wasn't sure what to say. I double-checked both doors were locked, then went to my bedroom and locked that door, too, just in case. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and leaned it against the nightstand. My heart was still racing, and I wasn't sure I'd sleep, but I stripped off my sweaty running clothes and put on shorts and a t-shirt. I grabbed my phone and lay in bed, scrolling aimlessly to distract myself. Hours passed. My mind kept circling back to the masks and the strange symbols. My body remained tense. Every little noise made me jump. Finally, around 1 a.m., my eyelids grew heavy. I set my phone aside and forced myself to close my eyes. A while later, I woke to footsteps outside on my driveway. My heart slammed again. I grabbed my phone: almost 3 a.m. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, not just a passerby. I gripped my bat and slipped out of bed, dry-mouthed and trembling. The house was dark and cold, a chill running down my spine. I crept to the living room window, moving quietly, easing one slat of the blinds open. Outside, my driveway was dimly lit by a street light across the road. At first, nothing. Then, a figure moved near my mailbox. Another masked figure. This one wore a hood, like the first in the woods. The white mask glowed faintly in the streetlight. He stared right at my house. I wanted to flick on the porch light, shout, do something, but something told me that wouldn't help. So I stayed still, my breath shallow, cold sweat slicking my forehead. The figure took a step forward, paused as if scanning the house, then backed away, disappearing into the shadows beyond the light. My knees nearly buckled. I almost dropped the bat. I forced myself to stand still, not opening the door or chasing him off. That would be foolish. What if there were more? My mind raced with questions. Nausea hit me. I couldn't just stand there. I reached for my phone, thinking about calling the cops, but hesitated. Would they believe me? What could I say? There are masked people lurking around my house. What if they vanished before officers arrived? I paced the living room, gripping the bat tightly, my hands clammy, stomach in knots. Every few minutes, I'd check the window again. No one. But that didn't help. I felt watched. Around 4 a.m., a noise came from the backyard. The fence squeaked as someone pushed on it. I froze, breathing hard. I switched off the lamp, cloaking the room in darkness, then crept to the kitchen window. Through the dim glass, I could barely make out the fence and my neighbor's shed. A slight motion near the fence caught my eye. Suddenly, a face appeared right at the window. White mask. So close it startled me, nearly knocking over a chair. My heart pounded. I bit my lip, trying not to scream. The figure stood there, silent, staring in. No eyes, no details behind that blank mask, just a pale, expressionless face pressed against the glass. It tilted its head, then retreated into the darkness. I stayed frozen for at least 30 seconds, bat in one hand, phone in the other. Panic filled my mind. How many were out there? I rushed back to my bedroom, locked the door, and leaned against it, hands trembling so badly I could barely type. I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. I tried not to sound crazy as I explained the masked figures lurking near my home, looking through my windows. She told me to stay on the line, keep my doors locked, and wait for officers. I gave my address. Help was on the way. I hung up and gripped the bat tighter, waiting in the dark, pressed against my bedroom door, listening for sirens. Time slowed. My heart raced. Every creak and whisper made me flinch. After what felt like forever, flashing red and blue lights cast eerie patterns across my walls. The police had arrived. Car doors slammed, footsteps approached. I called out, identifying myself. 2 officers entered, shining flashlights around my living room. Their presence eased some fear. They asked me to explain again, and I told them everything, from the strange symbols in the woods to the masked figures outside. I showed them the window. They searched the backyard, the fence, the perimeter, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. They walked the front yard, up and down the sidewalk. No one. One officer suggested it might be a prank or that I'd misseen things, but I could tell they believed I was genuinely scared. They took my statement and promised to have a patrol car check in throughout the night. After they left, I was still on edge but felt less alone. I locked everything again and sat in the living room until dawn, too wired to sleep. I kept checking outside every few minutes. No more movement, no more masked faces. But every noise made my heart jump. When morning came, I dressed and went outside to look around. The air was cool, the sky brightening. No footprints near the mailbox. The backyard gate was shut but unlocked. I stepped outside and noticed scuff marks in the dirt near the fence, like someone had stood or tried to climb it. No other signs. I felt exposed in the open. I thought about those symbols on the trees in the woods. Part of me wanted to go back and investigate in daylight, but the thought made my stomach churn. Those blank, white masks watching silently wouldn't leave my mind. I decided to wait. Back inside, I brewed coffee, sipping nervously while staring out the backyard window. My hands trembled. I barely ate the rest of the day, feeling jumpy and exhausted. I tried watching TV but couldn't focus. Often, I checked the windows. No one appeared. The police drove by a couple of times, but I had no new evidence. I still don't know who they were or what those symbols meant. All I know is I'll never forget those blank white masks staring at me from the dark. I have no idea if they'll return. For now, I'm keeping my doors locked and my eyes wide open. I'm not taking any chances. Pulled out of the gas station slowly, keeping a close eye on the mirrors. The shadow now seemed completely normal, exactly matching every movement, which both comforted me and left me confused. Had my mind been playing tricks earlier? Or was something else going on, something I just couldn't explain? I drove the rest of the way home cautiously, still feeling the prickling sensation at the back of my neck every time I glanced at the dark spaces around me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I hesitated before shutting off the engine. I stared into the rearview mirror one last time. Nothing unusual. No lagging shadow, no odd shapes. I locked my doors quickly and stepped inside, double-checking every lock. I sat on my couch for a long time, the bottle of cold water still in my hand, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The whole experience felt like something out of a nightmare, a moment suspended between reality and something else. And though the shadow was normal now, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me, and that maybe, just maybe, it hadn't really wanted to leave. I kept the curtains drawn tight that night, the faint glow of the street lamp outside barely piercing the darkness in my living room. Every time a car passed by, I jumped a little, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. My phone sat on the coffee table, its charging cable plugged in but completely ignored. I didn't want to be distracted, I wanted to stay alert, even if it meant losing sleep. Around midnight, just when I was starting to convince myself I'd dreamed the whole thing, I heard it, a faint tapping on the window. My breath caught, and I froze. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate, almost like a warning. I glanced toward the window, but there was nothing visible outside except the usual shadows cast by the trees swaying in the breeze. I swallowed hard, the dry lump in my throat growing bigger. Slowly, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Empty. No one there. Just the dark night and the faint shimmer of streetlights. But then, on the ground below, I saw it, my shadow. Or at least something that looked like it. It stretched unnaturally long across the pavement, flickering slightly, like a flame in the wind. It didn't match the motion of the trees or the streetlight. For a moment, I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my fingers trembled too much to dial. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed outside. The night was colder than before, the air heavy with silence. I scanned the empty street, heart pounding, eyes darting around. The shadow on the pavement moved again, just a little, but definitely not on its own. I whispered, almost to myself, "What do you want from me?" The shadow paused. Then, for the first time, it shifted, slowly, deliberately, into a shape that wasn't mine. It bent forward like a person watching me, its head tilting as if studying me in the dim light. I stumbled back a step. The shadow's edges rippled, like ink dropped in water, then it faded into nothingness. I stood there in the cold night air, alone, shaken, wondering if I'd ever see a normal shadow again. It was darker than usual, thicker somehow, more solid. And it wasn't moving exactly like me. I raised my hand slowly, watching the shadow's fingers twitch out of sync with mine, curling before I did. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I wanted to turn on the bedside lamp to flood the room with light, but my fingers hesitated. I took a step back, heart hammering against my ribs. The shadow stayed, almost watching, shifting with a delay like it had its own mind. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow and quick. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, to run, lock every door, call someone, but my legs felt heavy, frozen. Then, without warning, the shadow on the wall stretched and distorted, twisting into a shape that looked almost human but wrong, elongated limbs, a head tilted at an impossible angle. I stumbled backwards, bumping into the dresser. My phone slipped from the surface and hit the floor with a dull thud. The room felt impossibly cold, despite the summer heat outside. "Okay," I whispered to myself, voice barely steady, "this is not real. Just a trick of the light. I'm just tired." But as I reached to pick up my phone, the shadow dissolved, snapping back into normal shape, perfectly mirroring my hand reaching down. I stood there, frozen, caught between relief and terror. Something was definitely wrong. And tonight wasn't over yet. I forced myself to take a deep breath and switch on the bedside lamp. The harsh light flooded the room, washing away most of the shadow on the wall. But even in the brightness, I could still see a faint outline, a dark blur that didn't quite belong. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke out along my back. I grabbed my phone off the floor and checked the time. It was almost 2 a.m. My thoughts were racing, my mind refusing to calm. I told myself to rationalize it, maybe exhaustion was playing tricks, or the flickering light had warped the shadow. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. I pulled my blanket over my shoulders and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my nerves. The silence in the house was heavy, almost oppressive. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creak of the old wooden floor settling somewhere in the distance, but nothing else. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement again. The shadow on the wall shifted slightly, even though I was perfectly still. I froze. A slow, deliberate inching motion. It was as if the shadow was alive, watching me, waiting. I reached for my phone again and started dialing my best friend, someone I could call to come over, someone who would believe me without judging. Before the call connected, the power in the house flickered once, then went completely dark. The silence was broken by a soft, almost whispering sound, like breath against the back of my neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the shadow on the wall was gone. And the room felt colder than ever. Bed, my hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. The room felt normal now, just me and my shadow, perfectly in sync. Yet, the memory of last night's strange delay lingered like a shadow on my mind. I kept telling myself it was over. Maybe just exhaustion, maybe my brain playing tricks in the darkness. But even as I stood to get a glass of water, a tiny part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. Waiting. I glanced toward the window. The first hints of dawn were beginning to creep through the curtains, softening the edges of the room. Outside, the world was waking up, ordinary and safe. Yet inside, I felt like I was still caught between light and shadow, between what was real and what wasn't. I wanted to believe this was the end of it. But deep down, I knew that shadow wasn't done with me yet. I set the glass down and forced myself to breathe steadily. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the house, to run far away, anywhere but here, but exhaustion held me firmly in place. I wasn't sure if I was too tired or too terrified to move. The silence felt heavier than the darkness had. My eyes kept darting toward the corners of the room, expecting something, anything, to shift or flicker. But there was nothing. Just my shadow, obedient and still. I sat back on the edge of the bed, running my hands through my hair, trying to steady my racing mind. Was it possible that the shadow had been trying to tell me something? Or was it just a cruel prank of my imagination, fueled by stress and too many late nights? I debated whether I should call someone, anyone. Maybe a friend to stay with me or at least talk me through this. But even the thought of explaining what had happened felt surreal, like admitting I'd lost touch with reality. The morning light crept in, brighter now. I glanced again at the wall, and my shadow remained perfectly aligned, no hesitation or delay. Maybe the nightmare was truly over. But as I lay back down, trying to convince myself to sleep, I noticed something new, a faint flicker just beyond the shadow's edge, like a whisper of movement that shouldn't be there. My breath caught. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished with me yet. Was quiet except for the faint hum of the cables. I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping to relax. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, then went out completely. The elevator plunged into darkness. My heart jumped, and my breath hitched. The hum stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket to use its flashlight, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Panic started to rise, thick and fast. Then, from the corner of the elevator, I noticed a faint shadow stretching along the wall. It wasn't mine. It flickered and shifted, almost alive, moving slowly closer to me even though I stood perfectly still. I backed away, my hands pressing against the elevator wall. The shadow seemed to pulse, growing larger and darker. I could feel a cold pressure in the air, like something unseen was pressing in. Suddenly, the lights snapped back on. The shadow vanished as if it were never there. The elevator doors opened on the lobby floor, and I stumbled out, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't wait for the doors to close. I bolted for the exit, my mind racing with one terrifying thought. Whatever was following me wasn't confined to the shadows outside anymore. It had found a way inside. I didn't look back as I rushed through the lobby and out into the night air. The city lights felt harsh but somehow comforting, a sharp contrast to the suffocating darkness inside the building. My breaths came out ragged, and my hands trembled as I fumbled with my keys at the car. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there for a long moment, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, stress, exhaustion, maybe too many late nights. But deep down, I knew that shadow wasn't a product of my mind. It felt real. I started the engine and drove off, the street lights casting their usual glow over the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shifting silhouette again. When I finally got home, I hesitated before stepping inside. The front porch light was off, and the house was wrapped in silence. I reached out, flicked the switch, and the porch light buzzed to life, revealing my shadow on the wall, still perfectly synchronized, no delay. But as I stepped inside, I couldn't help but wonder, was it really just my shadow, or had that darkness found a way to follow me home? The elevator creaked a little more than usual as it descended. I stared up at the illuminated numbers above the door, 14, 13, 12, and that's when things started getting really strange. Usually, the elevator would run straight down to the lobby at night. Security locked all the floors after hours, no one was supposed to be inside. But this time, the elevator jerked to a sudden stop on the 12th floor. Like someone had pressed the button. I figured maybe security was making rounds or some late-night maintenance worker was there. But when the doors slid open, the hallway was plunged in darkness, with just a faint glow from a single overhead bulb. It reminded me of those dingy old basements where the light bulb's about to burn out. No one stepped inside. No footsteps echoed. But I heard a strange hiss, a static crackle that seemed to drift from the shadows. I leaned forward, eyes scanning the dark corridor. The worn carpet and closed doors stretched out on either side. Every door shut tight, no light seeping out from beneath. My stomach tightened. I pressed the close door button, but it took longer than usual to respond. When the doors finally slid shut, I exhaled deeply without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I told myself it was a glitch. Maybe someone called the elevator and changed their mind. That kind of thing happens, especially in an older building. But then the elevator started moving again, counting down the floors, 11, 10, and then it stopped abruptly on the 9th floor. The doors slid open onto a corridor that wasn't supposed to be accessible after hours. Most staff had left by 6, and security passes were required to get into these areas. But here it was, open and dark. The overhead lights were off except for an emergency exit sign at the far end, its red glow pulsing ominously. Then came the whispers. Soft, muffled voices that floated through the stale air like a breeze. I couldn't see anyone. My jaw clenched as I tapped the close door button again, finger trembling. The doors took forever to shut. I backed away, eyes fixed on the doorway, half expecting someone, or something, to emerge. Nothing. The doors finally slid closed, and the elevator resumed its descent. My heart pounded wildly, palms sweaty. I wiped them on my pants, trying to think logically. Power outages, faulty controls. I promised myself I'd find security and report it once I reached the lobby. But the elevator didn't go straight down. It stopped again, this time on the 7th floor. The corridor was pitch black except for flickering lights that created a disorienting strobe effect. My head spun, dizziness hitting me hard. The shadows the strobe lights cast gave the walls and door frames a harsh, unnatural outline. Then came the shuffle. A slow, dragging sound like someone pacing. And a single knock. One sharp rap against a door. Silence. I leaned forward before I realized it. My instincts screamed to stay back, but curiosity nudged me closer. My stomach twisted in knots as I imagined someone just around the corner, listening. The lights flickered once more, then went out completely. I was left in total darkness except for the faint glow of the elevator's overhead light behind me. When the corridor lights flashed back on, I swear I saw a shape at the far end of the hallway. But it vanished as fast as it appeared. My heart slammed harder. I slammed the close door button. The doors closed faster this time, and the elevator jolted downward. I muttered to myself, begging for calm. Sweat soaked my shirt, my knees trembled. Every muscle tensed, every sense on high alert. The elevator shuddered and skipped floors, going from 7 down to 4, missing 6 and 5 altogether. The abrupt stop nearly threw me off balance. I grabbed the handrail, steadied myself. When the doors opened, the 4th floor hallway buzzed with the irritating drone of old fluorescent lights. The hum rattled my ears. The hallway was empty except for a pile of dusty boxes stacked near the elevator. The top box's lid was slightly ajar, like someone had been rifling through it. I looked left and right, and then I heard footsteps, slow, steady pacing, coming from a corridor around the corner. I swallowed hard and pressed the lobby button again, praying the doors would close before whoever was out there approached. But the doors didn't respond. My pulse skyrocketed. I pounded the button, but the elevator was stuck. Then the footsteps stopped, and a heavy silence fell, hitting me like a physical blow. The fluorescent hum grew louder in my ears. I tried the alarm button. A buzz rang out inside the elevator, but no one answered. I grabbed the emergency phone. No dial tone. I whispered, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, without warning, the doors slid shut on their own, no beep, no click. The elevator lurched downward, jerking unevenly. Waves of nausea swept over me as my legs trembled uncontrollably. The panel's numbers blinked down to 1. And then went blank. I stared, willing it to light up again. When it did, the display read, B1. The building had only one basement floor, storage and maintenance. I'd never had reason to go down there, and I didn't want to start now. The elevator doors slid open to a narrow, grim corridor that didn't match the basement layout I knew. Concrete walls stained with water, a single bare light bulb swinging gently above, casting weak shadows. A cold draft brushed my ankles. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. I pressed back into the corner of the elevator, desperate for the doors to close. But they stayed open, as if inviting me out. Then came a voice. Soft, almost inaudible, whispering. "Hey." The metallic smell of rust filled the air. The cold sharpened like a blade. My hands went clammy. The hair on my arms stood on end. The voice came again, clearer and more insistent. "Over here." I shook my head, telling myself no. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I tried the lobby button. Nothing. I tried the closed door button. Still nothing. The elevator was stuck. Waiting. A soft scuff echoed from the darkness, followed by faint tapping, like fingers drumming on a pipe. Each tap made my nerves jump. The corridor was too dark to see beyond the weak circle of light from the bulb. Panic exploded inside me. I slammed the alarm button again. Buzz. No response. I grabbed the emergency phone, whispered into it. Silence. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then the doors started closing on their own, slowly, silently. As they sealed shut, the elevator began ascending. The panel blinked from B1 to something I hadn't seen before, BB. I'd never noticed that before. The elevator stopped again, doors sliding open to a hallway that looked like a different building altogether. Dull yellow walls, scuffed linoleum floors, a single flickering fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The stale, musty smell of a forgotten attic filled the air. A lone folding chair sat against the wall. My legs felt weak. Static crackled in the distance, like an untuned radio. The sound grew louder as I stepped closer to the hallway's bend. Then a click, like someone fiddling with an old dial. My heart thundered. I gasped. The building, the floors, the elevator, all felt wrong. Impossible. I forced myself to retreat into the elevator. Enough. I pressed the lobby button again. This time, the doors closed smoothly. The elevator climbed steadily. Passing 1, 2, 3. No stops. Then the lobby doors opened. I burst out, relief flooding me. The lobby looked normal. Lights bright, front desk empty but orderly. No flickers, no whispers. I ran out of the building, breathing hard. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Street lights illuminated the pavement. Cars passed in the distance. I took a deep breath of cold night air. My pulse began to slow. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands trembled. I looked back once. The building loomed as usual. No signs of the horrors inside. No flickering lights. No dark hallways. But I knew the truth. I'd been somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't exist. If I told anyone, they'd think I was crazy. But I wasn't. I experienced things no one else should. Strange floors. Whispering voices. Corridors that vanished. And shadows that followed me long after. That night changed me. I still feel it sometimes. The elevator numbers counting down. The flicker of lights. The faintest whisper before the doors slide open. I don't know if it was a glitch. Or something far worse. But I'll never step into that elevator again. And neither should you. If you liked this story and want to hear more chilling tales like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Don't forget to like and share this video if it gave you chills. Thanks so much for watching, stay safe, keep your doors locked, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye, for now.